He lived alone, refusing to have children nearby, until she arrived with 4 orphans and an impossible request. What began as one night turned into something no one expected. Subscribe to the channel and discover how his silence transformed into protection and love. The silence of the Caatinga was broken only by the occasional song of a solitary bird and the dry noise of twigs snapping under Sebastião's feet. The residents of Pedra Seca knew that figure well. A 50-year-old man, hair prematurely grey, deep-set eyes that carried more sadness than any person should bear. His walk was heavy, as if dragging not just worn boots but memories that no one else could see. The small mud house where he lived was half a league from the village, isolated among Jurema trees and Mandakaru cacti, almost hidden, as if the construction itself wanted to withdraw from the world. The path there was nearly erased, overtaken by thorny plants and intentional forgetting. For 5 years, no one had been invited to cross that door, and the few who tried received only silence in response. Sebastião, who had once been the most respected cowboy in the region, was now just a shadow, a ghost who appeared at the market fortnightly to trade the few cheeses he still produced for flour, coffee, and rapadura. He never exchanged words, only short nods of the head. No one dared ask about the tragedy, though everyone knew. The drought of 1982 had taken not just the cattle and crops, it had also taken Josefa and little Tiao, not by thirst or hunger, but by the hands of those who came to take the lands that had belonged to the family for generations. To resist meant losing them. To survive meant carrying that guilt. "He chose to die in life," said Dona Generosa, the oldest healer in the village, when someone mentioned Sebastião's name. "Even the soul can dry up like the earth when it loses the water of hope." Sebastião's house reflected the state of his soul. Peeling walls, a small corral where only 3 goats remained, a skinny horse and an old dog that no longer even barked. The interior was even emptier. A worn hammock, a wood stove, a table with a single bench, plates and cutlery for just one person. On the walls, no photographs, no mementos. Sebastião had stored everything in the room that remained locked, the room that had once been theirs. That August afternoon was particularly dry. The sky, an aggressive blue, didn't show a single cloud that might bring hope of rain. Dust rose with any movement, as if the earth itself was disintegrating. Sebastião had just returned from the woods with some twigs for the stove when he heard something he hadn't heard in years: knocks on his door. They weren't firm or confident knocks, but hesitant, almost an apology. For a moment, he thought about ignoring them. Whoever it was would soon give up. But the knocks continued, now accompanied by a female voice, weak and tired. Something in that voice made him walk to the door. When he opened it, the strong sunlight blinded him for a moment. When his eyes adjusted, he saw a thin woman, her face marked by dust and suffering. Her black hair was tied in a disheveled bun, and her clothes, though clean, showed signs of long journeys. Behind her, partially hidden, 4 children watched him with frightened eyes. "Please," said the woman, firmly holding the hand of the youngest child, a girl who couldn't have been more than 4 years old. "We just need a place to spend the night. We've been walking from Juazeiro." Sebastião felt a refusal forming in his throat. That house didn't receive visitors, much less children. Children brought noise, questions, and worse, reminded him of the son he couldn't protect. But before he could say any word, his eyes met those of the oldest child, a boy of about 12. There was something in that gaze. It wasn't fear like in the other children, but a silent determination, a contained strength that seemed to challenge the world, even in his fragility. It was a look he knew well, for he had seen it many times in the mirror, years ago. "Just for one night," the woman repeated, and her voice trembled slightly. Sebastião then noticed the marks on her arms, already yellowing bruises that told a story he didn't need to hear to understand. He stepped aside, making way. He said nothing, not even a formal invitation. He just moved away from the door, allowing them to enter. The woman hesitated for a second, surprised by the silent response, then gestured for the children to follow her. They entered in a line, each carrying a small bundle of clothes. The oldest boy was the last, giving Sebastião a look that was both gratitude and assessment. The house, which had known only solitude for so long, suddenly seemed smaller and warmer. Sebastião closed the door and observed the unexpected visitors. Besides the oldest boy and the small girl, there were 2 others. A boy of about 8, as thin as a twig, and a girl of about 10, with large brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. "My name is Louisa," said the woman, breaking the silence. "These are my nieces and nephews. Berenice," she pointed to the small girl, "Tonino, the thin boy, Raquel, the girl with attentive eyes, and Miguel, the oldest." Sebastião merely nodded, without offering his own name. He walked to the stove and added more firewood, reviving the fire that had almost gone out. From the small cupboard he took a piece of dried meat, some cassava, and an onion. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. While he prepared the food, he felt the children's gazes following his every move. He wasn't accustomed to having an audience, and his hands seemed clumsy under that attention. The silence was heavy. "Can I help?" Louisa's voice appeared beside him, so close that he almost dropped the knife. She had approached without him noticing. Sebastião handed her the onion without saying a word. Louisa began to peel it with the skill of someone accustomed to cooking in much worse conditions. The children, realizing they wouldn't be expelled, began to relax. Little Berenice sat on the packed earth floor and took out a worn cloth doll from her bundle, whispering stories to it. Tonino explored the space with curious eyes, but without touching anything. Raquel helped her aunt, and Miguel remained standing like a silent guardian, his eyes alternating between the door and the rest of the family. The meal was served in silence. Sebastião had to improvise, using his mugs as extra plates. They ate slowly, savoring each piece, and he noticed how the children waited for their aunt to start before they did, as if that small ritual was important. When they finished, Louisa collected everything and, without being asked, began to wash the dishes with the water he kept in a large pot. Night fell over the Caatinga, bringing a cold that contrasted with the day's heat. Sebastião indicated the corner of the room where they could spread their bundles to sleep. He himself hung his hammock at the other end of the room, creating an invisible separation. As he tried to fall asleep, he heard Louisa's low voice singing a lullaby to Berenice. It was a simple, sad melody, one of those certain songs that speak of rivers that never dry up and birds that always find their way back. It had been so long since he had heard such a song that something inside him seemed to move, like a stone being displaced after years. Long after the song ended, when everyone was asleep, Sebastião remained awake, observing the thatched roof, aware of each breath, each small movement of the sleeping bodies in his house. It was then that he heard an almost imperceptible sound, like water springing from a dry stone. He rose silently in the hammock and saw in the dark the gleam of open eyes. Miguel, sitting with his back against the wall, standing guard while the others slept. Their gazes met across the darkness, two sentinels, each protecting what remained of his world. Without words, they made an agreement that night. An agreement that neither yet fully understood, but that would change everything. Dawn arrived with the promise of another dry day. Sebastião woke before everyone, as was his custom. For a moment, upon opening his eyes, he forgot that he was no longer alone. It was the soft sound of the children's breathing that brought him back to the altered reality of his house. He rose silently and went out to the yard. The sky was beginning to lighten, and the goats were already waiting for him in the small corral. The routine, at least that, remained the same. When he returned with a bucket of fresh milk, he found Louisa already up, rekindling the fire in the stove. She greeted him with a nod, without breaking the silence of the morning. There was a tacit understanding between them. Words weren't necessary. Sebastião placed the milk on the table and went to fetch the rest of the coffee he kept. As the water heated, the children began to wake. First Miguel, always alert, then Raquel, who immediately began to fold the bundles that had served as beds. Tonino woke, rubbing his eyes, and Berenice was the last, still hugging her cloth doll. Breakfast was simple: milk, coffee, and the rest of the cassava from the night before. They ate in silence, but Sebastião noticed how the children's eyes seemed more alive in the daylight. When they finished, Louisa stood up and began to gather the few things they owned. "We thank you for your kindness," she said, finally breaking the silence. "We'll be on our way now." Sebastião nodded, feeling a strange discomfort. He should have been relieved to be left alone again, but something bothered him. It was then that he noticed little Tonino looking out the window with fascination. "What are those little white things on the plants?" asked the boy, pointing outside. Sebastião approached the window and saw the small Mandacaru cactus flowers that had bloomed during the night. a rare sign of life in the aridness of the Caatinga. He hesitated for a moment, then answered in a voice hoarse from disuse. Mandakaru flowers. They only appear at night. By noon they'll have disappeared. Tonino's face lit up upon hearing the answer, as if Sebastião had revealed a great secret of the universe. It was the first time in years that Sebastião had uttered more than 2 words in a row. The sound of his own voice seemed strange to him. Luisa observed the scene with an indecisive expression. She adjusted the scarf on her head and said, "We're heading to Petrolina. They say there's work in the irrigation projects there." Sebastião knew that kind of hope well, the kind that makes people walk days under the merciless sun, chasing rumors of work and a better life. He also knew what usually happened to women alone with children who arrived desperate to unknown places. Before he could think too much, the words escaped. "The well needs cleaning and the goats need fresh pasture." It was an invitation disguised as necessity, but Luisa understood immediately. Her face revealed first surprise, then contained relief. "We can help with that before we leave," she replied with dignity. "The children are good workers." Miguel, who observed everything with attention, stepped forward. "I know how to care for animals," he said, with a seriousness beyond his years, "and Raquel knows how to find good herbs, even in dry land." That's how one day turned into 2. Sebastião and Miguel spent the morning cleaning the well, while Luisa and Raquel explored the surroundings in search of herbs and fruits. Tonino was tasked with taking the goats to graze in the few green patches that remained, and little Berenice played in the shade of a nearby umbuzeiro tree, talking to her doll. Work flowed in a comfortable silence, broken only by occasional instructions. In the late afternoon, when the heat gave a truce, they sat in the shade to share the late lunch that Luisa had prepared, a hearty broth with the herbs and roots that Raquel had found. "How did you learn to recognize the plants?" Sebastião asked the girl, surprising everyone with his sudden interest. Raquel, shy with the attention, looked at her aunt before answering. "My grandmother taught me," she finally said, "before she departed." The word departed carried the weight that everyone there understood. In the language of the Sertão, absences had many names. Rarely was the word death pronounced. Sebastião nodded, respecting both the knowledge and the loss. The night brought a cool breeze, and Sebastião surprised everyone by taking out of an old chest some blankets. "For the children," he said, handing them to Luisa, "the nights are getting colder." On the 3rd day, the presence of the visitors had already established a rhythm in the previously silent house. Miguel woke up early like Sebastião and accompanied him in caring for the animals. The boy had skillful hands and learned quickly. Raquel helped Luisa with the food and cleaning, while Tonino revealed a special talent for finding water. He could locate small hidden springs that even Sebastião didn't know about. Berenice, with her innocence, was the only one who could draw something close to a smile from the austere face of the host. It was during this 3rd day that Sebastião finally asked what everyone avoided mentioning. He and Miguel were fixing the corral fence when the words came out, almost against his will. "Who are you running from?" Miguel tensed immediately, but didn't avert his gaze. With the same dignity that Sebastião had seen in Luisa, the boy answered, "From Colonel Jeremias, owner of the lands of Boqueirão." The name made Sebastião grip the wood he was holding more tightly. He knew that name well. Jeremias Dantas was one of the most powerful men in the region, owner of farms that extended for leagues. He had a reputation for being cruel and merciless, especially with those he considered inferior. "He wanted to take us," continued Miguel, his voice lowering. "Said we had a debt, that our father had sold our labor before he went away." Sebastião understood what wasn't said. He knew this type of agreement well. Desperate men selling their children's future in exchange for food or protection. When they couldn't pay, the children paid with labor that more resembled slavery. "How many days has it been since you left there?" he asked. "7, replied Miguel. "But he'll look for us. He always finds those who run away." There was a dark certainty in the boy's voice. "And your aunt?" asked Sebastião, though he already suspected the answer. Miguel looked at the house where Luisa was hanging freshly washed clothes. "She's not really our aunt," he said softly. "Our mother, she passed away last year. Luisa worked in the farm's kitchen. She helped us escape." The respect that Sebastião already felt for Luisa increased. To risk oneself for children who weren't even hers, to face someone like Jeremias, it took courage. That night, After everyone had retired, Sebastian remained awake, thinking. For the first time in years, his thoughts were not just turned to the past, to what he had lost. He was thinking about the present, about the 5 lives that fate had placed under his roof. And he was also thinking about the future, about the threats that loomed over them. On the 4th day, an unexpected visit broke the routine that was beginning to establish itself. Donna Generosa, the village healer, appeared limping along the almost erased path that led to the house. She was a small lady, with white hair and skin wrinkled by the sun, known for her knowledge of herbs and prayers, and also for her stubbornness. She was one of the few people who occasionally tried to pull Sebastião out of his isolation. "I came to see if you're still among the living," she announced, entering without ceremony. She stopped in surprise when she saw Luisa and the children. Well, it seems heaven has finally answered my prayers," she said, with a smile that revealed few teeth. Sebastião merely grunted in response, but he didn't expel her as he normally would. Donna Generosa sat as if invited and accepted the coffee that Luisa promptly offered. Her experienced eyes examined each child. When she came to Berenice, the old healer frowned. "This little one has a fever," she declared, touching the girl's forehead. Only then did Sebastião notice that Berenice was quieter than normal, her face flushed. Luisa confirmed, worried. "It started last night. I thought it was just the heat." Donna Generosa opened her herb bag and began to prepare a tea while murmuring ancient prayers, Sebastião observed, feeling a restlessness he hadn't experienced in a long time, concern for someone beyond himself. "We need to take the girl to the health post in Vila Nova," said Donna Generosa, after making Berenice drink the bitter tea. "This remedy will lower the fever, but she needs a doctor." Vila Nova was more than 2 hours' walk away. Too much time for a sick child. "I'll get the horse," said Sebastião, already heading for the door. Luisa stopped him with a light touch on his arm. "It's dangerous," she said, fear evident in her eyes. "If we go to Vila Nova, they might recognize us. The colonel has men everywhere." Sebastião felt the weight of the decision. Helping meant getting more involved, taking risks. It meant leaving the cocoon of isolation he had built to protect himself from pain. On the other hand, doing nothing could mean losing the girl. And he already knew the taste of that loss all too well. "I'll go," he finally decided. "You stay here with Donna Generosa." His eyes met Miguel's. "Take care of them," he said, and there was a respect in those words that made the boy straighten his shoulders, assuming the responsibility. As Sebastião saddled the horse, Donna Generosa approached. "The heart you buried is beating again," she said, with the wisdom of the very old. "But remember, whoever opens the door to life also opens it to pain." Sebastião didn't respond, but the words accompanied him as he galloped through the Caatinga, with Berenice asleep in his arms, small and warm like a wounded little bird. The dry wind of the Sertão cut his face and dust rose under the horse's hooves. On the horizon, dark clouds were beginning to form, perhaps announcing a storm, perhaps just another empty promise of rain. Either way, a change was on its way. The health post in Vila Nova was a simple construction of white bricks with a single nurse to attend to the entire region. When Sebastião arrived with Berenice in his arms, the sun was already beginning to set, painting the sky in orange tones. Nurse Marlene, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and firm hands, didn't ask unnecessary questions when she saw the state of the girl. She simply indicated the cot where Sebastião should place her and immediately began to examine her. "Infection," she diagnosed after a few minutes. "Probably started with a small wound that became inflamed." As she prepared an antibiotic injection, she casually asked, "Your daughter?" The question caught Sebastião off guard. He looked at Berenice, so small and vulnerable on the large cot, her chest rising and falling in agitated breathing, the cloth doll still clutched in her hand. "Yes," he answered, surprised by his own response. "My daughter." The lie, he realized, didn't really feel like a lie. The nurse nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. "She'll need to stay under observation tonight. The fever should subside with the medication, but I want to be sure." Sebastião hesitated. He couldn't leave Berenice alone, but he also couldn't spend the night away. Luisa and the other children would be worried, and Donna Generosa, despite her strength of spirit, would be no match for the colonel's men if they appeared. "I need to go back," he finally said. "There are other children at home." Marlene studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Come back early tomorrow. I'll take care of her tonight." Before leaving, Sebastião approached Berenice, who now slept more peacefully thanks to the medication. He hesitated, then lightly touched her hair. "I'll be back tomorrow," he promised in a low voice. On the way back, under the starry sky of the Sertão, Sebastian felt strangely divided. Part of him yearned to return to the house, to make sure everyone was all right. Another part feared what was happening, how those 5 lives were quickly intertwining with his, undoing years of carefully constructed isolation. It was as if a dam was breaking inside him, and he didn't know if he had the strength to contain the flood of feelings that threatened to overflow. When he finally saw the faint light coming from his house, he felt a relief he hadn't experienced in a long time. As he approached, however, he noticed something strange. There was another horse tied up outside, an animal he didn't recognize. He dismounted silently and approached with caution. Through the window he saw a man sitting at his table, a stranger in a leather hat and clothes dusty from travel. Luisa was serving coffee with hands that tried not to tremble, while Miguel watched the visitor with barely disguised distrust. Raquel and Tonino were sitting together in a corner, quiet as mice. Dona Generosa was nowhere to be seen. Sebastião entered without ceremony, his hand instinctively seeking the knife he carried at his waist. The stranger turned to him and smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ah, there's the owner of the house," said the man, standing up. "Zé Pequeno, foreman of Boqueirão Farm." Sebastião felt the blood freeze in his veins. So they had already been found. The question was, what did this man know exactly? "What brings you here?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral while positioning himself between the foreman and the children. Zé Pequeno took a sip of coffee before answering. "We're looking for workers for the harvest," he said, his eyes never leaving Sebastião's face. "I heard you have a good hand with animals. Colonel Jeremias pays well." It was a lie, of course. No one would travel to this remote place to hire a reclusive old man who barely spoke to people. They were looking for the fugitives, but apparently weren't yet sure if they were here. "I haven't worked for anyone in years," replied Sebastião, maintaining a casual tone as he sat at the table between the foreman and the rest of the family. "And I don't intend to start now." Zé Pequeno laughed, a sound without joy. "Every man has his price, Sebastião, especially in times of drought." His eyes wandered around the house, stopping at the clothing bundles in the corner and the signs of the children's presence. "I see you have company, relatives." The danger was palpable in the air. Sebastião thought quickly. Denying would be suspicious, especially with the visible evidence all around. "Yes," he answered, holding the foreman's gaze. "My sister and her children. They came from Paraíba, fleeing the drought." Zé Pequeno nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing. "Interesting. I didn't know you had living family, Sebastião. Everyone says you lost all of yours." It was a provocation, a test. Sebastião felt a knot in his stomach, but kept his face impassive. "Not everyone knows everything about me," he replied simply. The silence that followed was as tense as a rope stretched to its maximum. It was Miguel who broke it, stepping forward. "Uncle Sebastião taught me to take care of the goats," he said, with a naturalness that surprised everyone. "He says I have a knack for it." The boy was playing the game, reinforcing the story. His eyes briefly met Sebastião's, and there was a courage there that made the older man feel an unexpected pride. Zé Pequeno observed the interaction, and something in his face changed subtly. "Well," he finally said, rising, "I thank you for the coffee. I'll be on my way then. But the colonel's invitation remains open." At the door he turned one last time, his look now clearly threatening. "Oh, and if by chance you hear of fugitives in these parts, a woman with 4 children, the colonel is offering a good reward. They stole from him, you know, ugly business." The threat lingered in the air even after the sound of Zé Pequeno's horse hooves disappeared in the distance. Only then did Dona Generosa emerge from her hiding place in Sebastião's closed room, the room he never opened. "He didn't believe it," said the old healer, her voice grave. "He'll be back, and he won't be alone next time." Luisa hugged Raquel and Tonino, who finally let the fear show on their faces. Miguel remained firm, but Sebastião could see the effort it cost him. "Where is Berenice?" asked Luisa, noticing the girl's absence. "At the health post in Vila Nova," replied Sebastião. "The nurse is caring for her. The fever is starting to come down." The concern was visible on Luisa's face. "We need to leave," she said, her voice trembling. "We can't put you in danger too." Sebastião looked at each of them. Luisa with her dignity even in despair, Miguel with his precocious courage, Raquel with her silent wisdom, Tonino with his innocent curiosity, and thought of Berenice, so small and trusting in her bed at the health post. Something had changed inside him in these few days. The cocoon of isolation he had built around his pain was unraveling, and in its place was growing something he thought he would never feel again, a sense of responsibility for others, a desire to protect. "Nobody is going anywhere," he said, with a firmness that surprised even himself. "I'll fetch Berenice early tomorrow, and then we'll decide what to do." It was the first time he had spoken of we, including himself in a group after so many years alone. Donna Generosa observed him with an enigmatic smile. "The man who buried his heart is digging it up," she murmured, more to herself than to the others. That night no one slept peacefully. Even the children, normally exhausted after a full day of activities, tossed and turned restlessly in their improvised beds. Sebastião stood guard at the door, the old shotgun he hadn't used in years, now clean and loaded at his side. Luisa sat with him for a while, the two sharing a silence full of unspoken words. "Why are you helping us?" she finally asked, her voice just a whisper to not wake the children. Sebastião took time to respond, how to explain something that even he didn't fully understand. "Because you knocked on my door," he said at last, the simple words carrying a weight they both felt. In the early morning, Donna Generosa approached him with a cup of herbal tea. "Drink," she ordered. "You'll need strength." As he drank the bitter liquid, the old healer sat beside him. "You know what needs to be done," she said, her ancient eyes gleaming in the darkness. Sebastião nodded slowly. Yes, he knew. There was only one way to protect that family that fate had placed under his care, and that meant facing not just Colonel Jeremias and his men, but also the ghosts of his own past. Before the first ray of sun touched the horizon, Sebastián was already up, preparing. He woke Miguel with a gentle touch on the shoulder. "I'm going to get Berenice," he said softly. "Stay alert. If something happens—" He left the sentence unfinished, but the boy understood. He nodded with a seriousness that no child should have. "I'll take care of them," he promised. On the way to Villanova, Sebastián was thinking about what he would say to Nurse Marlene, how he would explain that they needed to leave immediately, thinking about where they would go, perhaps north, to Maranhão, where Colonel Jeremias had no influence, or perhaps south to the big cities where they could lose themselves in the crowd, thinking about how he would keep 5 mouths fed during the journey, but mainly thinking about how he had changed in so few days. The health post was quiet when he arrived. Berenice was sitting on the cot playing with her cloth doll. Her face was still pale, but the fever had clearly subsided. When she saw Sebastião, her eyes lit up in a way that made something tighten in his chest. "You came back!" she exclaimed, extending her small arms to him. Without hesitation, Sebastião took her in his arms, feeling her warm, fragile body against his. "I promised I would, didn't I?" he said, his voice husky with emotion. Marlene watched the scene with a smile. "The fever has completely subsided," she informed. "She's strong, your daughter." Again, Sebastião didn't correct the mistake. Somehow it no longer seemed like a mistake. "Thank you," he said simply. As they prepared to leave, Marlene detained him with a hand on his arm. "Sebastião," she said, her tone now serious. "Last night, men from Colonel Jeremias were here, asking questions about a woman with 4 children. Sebastião's heart quickened. "What did you tell them?" Marlene smiled sadly. "I told them I hadn't seen anyone like that the only child I treated was your daughter, who has lived with you for years." Her look was meaningful. "They didn't seem convinced. They're searching the entire region." Sebastião nodded, grateful. "We won't go home," he decided abruptly. "It's not safe." But where would they go then? As if reading his thoughts, Marlene opened a drawer and took out an envelope. "My brother lives in Juazeiro," she said. "He works at the agricultural cooperative. This is a letter for him. Go there. He can help you and your family start over." Sebastião took the envelope, feeling the weight of the choice he was making. It wasn't just an escape. It was a new beginning. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, echoing the question Luisa had asked him the night before. Marlene looked at Berenice, who now slept peacefully on Sebastião's shoulder. "Because everyone deserves a second chance," she answered simply, "even a man who gave up on life." With these words and the envelope secure in his pocket, Sebastião mounted his horse, Berenice held firmly in his arms, and took not the path back home, but the path to the north, where the others awaited him at the meeting point they had arranged, a crossroads marked by an old wooden cross, a silent witness to so many journeys of hope and despair across the Sertão. The wind had changed, he noticed. It now came from the north, bringing with it the distant smell of rain. Perhaps, just perhaps, the time of drought was coming to an end. The crossroads was deserted when Sebastião arrived with Berenice in his arms. The clouds on the horizon promised rain. He dismounted carefully and sought the shade of a solitary juazeiro tree, his heart tight with worry. When he finally spotted figures approaching, he recognized Luisa leading the group, Miguel at her side, followed by Raquel and Toninho. Dona Generosa came limping behind with her Jurema staff. "We made it," said Luisa, relief evident in her voice. Her eyes immediately went to Berenice, who awoke and smiled at seeing everyone reunited. Dona Generosa approached, her ancient eyes studying Sebastião's face. "Where do we go now?" she asked. Sebastião showed the envelope. "Juazeiro. The nurse has a brother there who can help us start over." Miguel frowned. "It's far, and the colonel's men will be searching." "I know ancient paths through the Caatinga that few know," responded Sebastião, with a new authority in his voice, the voice of a man who had found a purpose. Dona Generosa smiled. "I've seen many people cross the Sertão fleeing from something, but it's the first time I've seen someone like you, Sebastião, running towards something." From her herb bag, she took out a cloth bundle. "Seeds of umbu and mandacaru for when you reach your new home, and this rosary to protect you." She said goodbye, promising to mislead the pursuers. "You've found your way back," she whispered to Sebastião. "Now go forward without looking back." The first drop of rain fell when they were already distant, following an almost invisible trail. Soon they were walking under a fine but persistent rain. The children's faces lit up with amazement and joy. For Sebastião, the rain had a special meaning. In the 5 years since he had lost his family, he had refused to witness the rebirth that water brought to the Caatinga. Now, with water streaming down his face, he felt something awakening inside him. Painful, but necessary, like the first rain falling on parched earth. They found shelter in a shallow cave. In the silence of the night, Miguel asked, "Why are you risking everything for us?" Sebastião told about Josefa and Tião, about the burned house, about the ashes he found upon returning. It was Berenice who broke the silence that followed, touching his arm. "You're sad, but now you have us." The simplicity of the words hit him deeply. "Yes," he agreed, his voice choked. "Now I have you." The next morning the world was transformed. The Caatinga showed signs of life everywhere. "It seems like magic," exclaimed Raquel. "It's not magic," explained Sebastião. "It's the force of life. It's always here, waiting for its chance." The sound of horses alerted them. They hid among the rocks when 5 horsemen appeared, led by Zé Pequeno and Colonel Jeremias himself. "They passed through here," Zé Pequeno was saying. "We'll find them before nightfall," affirmed the colonel with cruel certainty. The horsemen followed in the wrong direction, toward Petrolina. Sebastião guided the group through invisible paths that only a cowboy born in that land would recognize. It was as if the Caatinga itself was protecting them. It was on the second day of the journey, camped near a water spring, that Berenice asked the question that would change everything. "Are you going to be our father now?" Sebastião looked at the children, then at Luisa. "If you want," he answered, "if you'll accept me." Berenice was the first to hug him, followed by the others. Even Miguel, normally so contained, joined the embrace. Luisa watched with tears in her eyes, until Sebastião included her in the circle. There a family was born, not by blood, but by choice. On the 3rd day, they sighted Juazeiro. As they crossed the San Francisco River, leaving behind the colonel's territory, Sebastião knew that no matter what challenges still awaited them, he would never be alone again. 6 months later, a small house on the outskirts of Juazeiro housed the most unusual and most united family in the region. In the yard grew umbuzeiro trees and mandacaru cacti from Dona Generosa's seeds. On the living room wall, a faded photograph of Josefa and Tião next to a drawing by Berenice, showing 7 figures holding hands under a rainy sky, the past and present coexisting, like pain and joy in the human heart. And Sebastio, who had once chosen to die in life, now chose to live fully each moment with the family that fate, and his own courage, had given him. If this journey through the Sertão touched your soul, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like and share what resonated most with you. Just as the rain found a way through Sebastio's dry earth, your words can make hope blossom in other hearts. Until our next story,